Bon après-midi tout le monde.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going back to what we were doing with the debate we had on Monday at the end of the meeting on a motion by Ms. Taylor-Roy. I believe you all have the motion. When the meeting ended, three members of the committee were on my list, on my speaking list. Mr. McLean, Mr. Longfield, and Mr. Deltel. Monsieur McLean, do you want the floor on Ms. Taylor-Roy's motion?
Does that happen? You turn these things off and they turn right back on like that. What I was lining up to say at the end of the other meeting, I think is properly led by Mr. Couric at this point in time. Thank you.
Well, do the members mind if I substitute Mr. Couric for Mr. McLean?
No.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. It's. I think all around this table would agree that we've had what I think has been very productive and important conversations. We heard from the diversity of groups affected, and as I did highlight at the conclusion of the last meeting, just some concerns that we would. It feels like we're jumping the gun a little bit here. The timing of not having even received, both the AER in response to one of the questions that I had moved, committed to tabling documentation related to the ongoing review that they have related to their process and wider scope than that. They committed to releasing that because they did mention that because it's an ongoing investigation that there was a few things they couldn't talk about, and I think that being a quasi-judicial body that they are is understandable, and it is totally fair for us to provide feedback if necessary, but without having seen what their reporting, their investigation and conclusions are, I think that it is premature to jump in and has the concern that we would attempt to politicize something that has a significant impact. And I know Ms. Goodridge spent a great deal of time at this committee and as the local MP, and although again we congratulate her on the birth of her son and her not being able to be here the last Monday as a result, but it's certainly. I would just urge a great deal of caution here because we're setting precedents that allow for basically to judge the testimony of witnesses before we actually have that information. We invite and like I had articulated, although I didn't want to take a lot of time at the outset of the meeting with the AAR to target one witness as one particular party did, just reeked of that political intervention. Conservatives have been very diligent at endeavoring to get to the bottom of this. We want to ensure that there is trust in the process, and whether that's the local impacts as Ms. Goodridge has articulated, in my constituency, I have a great, the energy sector plays a significant role, and as do the possible impacts. Needing to ensure that trust is found, and I understand that there are others around this table that have those impacts. And when it comes to documentation that has been tabled, I know members and I think it's okay that I say this, we have received some of that documentation, but there's about a file an inch thick that that Imperial laid on the table, so to speak, and that I imagine is being translated as is protocol. So there's a lot more information that's coming. So I certainly was concerned that the pre-positioning here was to make it more political than I think it should be. We all wanted to get to the bottom of this. We heard from Indigenous communities and the fear and the possible impacts. We heard from where there were failures, and I think that it's incredibly important that we navigate this carefully, and that on top of the concern that I've heard from many of certainly my constituents and other individuals across the country, that there has been the ponderings to not be as concerned, I think, as we ought to be. And I'm using my words carefully here because this could get really political. I'm endeavoring to keep it not political, but to the ponderings that exist to adjust or not care deeply for the role of provincial governments in these matters. And to note specifically that because of resource development is under federal jurisdiction and the Alberta Energy Regulator falling under that, just to be very, very mindful of that. I don't want to get into a big debate about that. Certainly there may be a time for that, but just to note how carefully we do have to adjust this. So my concern is that if we are moving too quickly on this before we have all the facts, it I think diminishes what has been a very productive number of meetings. And I think the results are that we have been able to get or start to get some answers that certainly Canadians expect us to get, and I think all of our constituents would be very proud of the work that we've been able to do to really get to the bottom of that. So, Mr. Chair, I would leave my comments there for the moment. In terms of the motion that's at hand, certainly I'd be open to considering some amendments to take out some of the more, what might be inflammatory in terms of that language. But I'm just concerned about the overall direction and the precedent that this committee is setting. If we're going to invite witnesses here, just imagine any member of this committee being invited to testify, but being told that it doesn't matter what you say, we're going to call you a liar. And that's a concerning precedent that I think we should all be really, really careful about how we approach that. So I would just urge caution, because if we want to make this political, then I don't think Canadians would be well served by the Standing Committee on the Environment to move that direction. So I would just urge a great deal of caution as we approach this particular motion and the way that we go forward, especially in light of, and I'll conclude here, the fact that we are going to be studying fresh water. That study will address many of these things, and the previous motion even added specifically that that those 3 meetings testimony would be included in that. So that's where I'll leave it for now, and I may have some more to say later. But thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Couric. Mr. Longfield.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks to Mr. Couric for the clarifications, or at least the openness to looking at this. I think the motion, the purpose of the motion is to say that we're not finished yet, that we'd like to see some follow-up, have a follow-up meeting to see the work that is right now in the early stages. By the time we were able to do some follow-up work, possibly we'd have some more answers. I was struck by the word failure in the motion myself, and I thought that was a judgmental word, and wonder whether there's a word that might be suggested to substitute there. Seeking might soften it, but also to say if they're seeking to provide appropriate answers, at least give some acknowledgement that they are working on getting answers. If there's an amendment that could be suggested, that might be one that might be considered. But I think the goal is to say, and I think we mentioned this during the committee hearings, that we would like to have a follow-up discussion with Imperial Oil and with the regulator to see what is done, in 6 months' time, so that we're not just leaving it to the wind.
We'll go now to Mr. Deltel. I see your point, maybe something like Alberta Energy Regulators' inability to provide definitive answers or something like that. But anyway, we'll go to Mr. Deltel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Moi, je vais vous dire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to say that I've been sitting here for 7 years. Sitting in this house for 7 years. So, thanks to my constituents, I've been here for 7 years, and this committee is one of the most interesting ones that I've taken part in. And you'll have noticed that I had some introductory words, and I was saying that this was important and this catastrophe, it was a catastrophe for the people who were affected directly, and we should not be afraid of asking severe, precise questions, targeted questions, and get answers to satisfy people and to build confidence again, as the chief said. And I would let the people who were affected directly speak first, especially the MP for Fort McMurray Cold Lake, where this happened. Obviously, if he's representing the people who were affected first by this, he should speak. Other people elsewhere have been affected, but he should be there to ask questions. I was also very proud of all my colleagues around the table. This could be like a time bomb in partisan politics, because we've all been elected here, and when we talk about elections, of course, it's a partisan thing. Elections are a partisan thing. That's essential. And we know that there will be elections in Alberta. So there could be bad things that could have happened, and it didn't, because we were all around here acting on the desire to get to the bottom of things and to let people talk and give the floor to people who are responsible for it, and to those who will make sure that it won't happen again. And I was amazed that, except for 2 or 3 pointed comments that are part of the debate on the 3 meetings, so 7:30 or 8 hours of debate and listening, there was no problem. So when the motion was tabled, the 6-month hence follow-up seemed like a good idea. That we would have access to more documents, it's also a good idea. As my colleague just said, we know that some documents were tabled, very thick documents, and as soon as evidence was required, they did provide documents. Of course, it was already prepared, and that's in the order of things. The president of Imperial Oil, was here. He answered difficult questions. So the boss of bosses was here, and that was in order too, and it was done. To have access to documents is obvious too, and for this to be public, it's fine. But as Mr. Critch said earlier, and Mr. Longfield as well, maybe some words here expresses certain tendency. And we have to remember that whichever witness we have, whether we agree with them or not, we have to have respect for them. And when we want them back, we can't say bad things about them. I can understand some qualifiers that were used. The First Nations who gave evidence were struck or affected by this incident. And of course, they're right when they say that they have no trust anymore, and trust has to be rebuilt. And we have to rebuild that confidence. And Mr. Chair, as a parliamentary committee, we owe respect to witnesses. They are Canadians like you and I, and they have something to say. And obviously, if we use certain qualifiers with them, well, they could. It's not the right way to welcome them as witnesses. I think that the approach and the words used should be looked at again. As a parliamentary, I say that this was a very interesting and extraordinary exercise. We gave the First Nations a chance to speak first, and then Imperial Oil, and their main boss was here. They didn't send just anyone. They sent the first person responsible, and we even learned what his salary is. Maybe we could be interested in that job someday. And we had provincial and municipal entities as well who had to react in this situation. It wasn't easy for them, but it was done well, and we have to keep this in our mind for the next meetings. Before giving the floor to Mr. McLean, are you in agreement with what I proposed to soften the proposal? If I understand well, you're for the proposal, but for the motion, but you want the wording to be softened.
Is that we've heard a good number of witnesses, some of whom are in the midst of reporting to the various entities that they need to put together this for. I think that two organizations in particular, Imperial Oil, their president, and the Alberta Energy Regulator, their president, have.
Alberta Energy Regulators est venu ici et ils ont demandé l'occasion de repartir un peu ce qu'ils font pour les communautés qui doivent servir. D'autres personnes auraient pu être touchées aussi s'il y avait eu un déversement, donc un manque de communication. C'est ce qui a créé ces craintes et cette anxiété.
Go through the process here. We're hoping this process, as far as the final report from each of these organizations, occurs within the next couple months. October's a long way away for us. And October being a long way away, I don't think our water study, unless Mr. Longfield we're going to be very astute and quick at this one, I think we'll still be in the midst of it. I think at that point in time, when we actually see the data we have, then we have the opportunity to call back the senior members that presented this time. The way this motion has been presented, it was presented as before the regulator even presented his thoughts, and has already supposed that he wasn't going to present fairly. So it is political as opposed to resolutional, if you will. How do we get involved, and how do we make sure that we're looking after people? And the environment is our focus here, and making sure that those environmental reporting requirements are met solidly. So I think I think we have lots of time to consider this motion, not the motion that was dropped on the committee prior to the AER president even testifying, because that's going to have some poison in it in itself. And so let's go through the full. Like I say, there's going to be a report from Imperial about what happened from their perspective. There's going to be a report from the AER about what happened from their perspective. And we're going to have to look at those. And I think it's incumbent upon us as a parliamentary committee to look on those, what the path is going forward that gives some assurances to the communities that we care about, all the way along my colleague, Ms. Goodridge's riding, that are affected by the operations at Curl. That's our role here. I don't think we need to presuppose as is indicated in the motion as written, that there was not forthcoming indication of what happened by all of these officials. So if we could park this resolution to a point later in the session before October, of course, when we actually do have the documentation that tells here's what happened, here's where the screw up occurred, here's what we do to fix that going forward, here's who is responsible to whom, and then we get in and say, how did this happen? Okay, where did these gaps emerge? If it's necessary at that point in time, I think that's the proper timing on it, as opposed to a motion that presupposed that the AER wasn't going to give one of our members the answers that she thought she needed in this. I do think there's been a great display of forthcoming information from all these organizations, and a great display of the fear and anxiety of the communities along the Athabasca and Slave rivers that are affected by these operations. So that would be what I propose here going forward. If the mover, Ms. Taylor-Roy, would like to withdraw this to a point where she looks at the documentation that will be due, and as Mr. Kirk said, there have been commitments made to provide us with all the information required, and it's going to be a tome. We know that. We're going to have to go through it. And that tome, the details in that tome are going to be important to us in considering what our role is and how we make a report on this as part of our water study. So I think if we need further clarification on this after those presentations, we have all the time in the world to do that. So I would ask the mover to think about that, and think about when it is most productive to have this motion put forth so that we can actually ascertain our role in determining a better outcome for the people affected by the actions of both the regulator and Imperial Oil. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you know, I put forward this motion, but I did it in conjunction with the member from the Northwest Territories. And as with the member from Fort McMurray, I can't say her name, but from Fort McMurray. Oh, I can, okay. Who I have congratulated on having her baby as well. Was also affected by this. So I appreciate the comments made by Mr. McLean and others, but I feel that regardless of the documentation we see, the intent of this motion, and perhaps it was the language in the preamble that's made you think otherwise, but the intent really is for us to follow up after time has passed to see what has been done. And I think given the fact that we have had all the testimonies at this point from the AER, Imperial Oil, and the First Nations and Métis people, that we are at a point where we can put forward a motion to say we want to have that follow-up meeting. I think, a number of points were made, and I'm amenable to, and I believe Mr. McLeod is also amenable to changing the preamble somewhat, as long as we have the follow-up meetings set, which is the point of this. And I think, Mr. McLean, you brought up the benefits agreement again, but we were told very clearly by the First Nation and Métis people that they felt those agreements had been broken now, and that there was a real lack of trust. And I think it's incumbent upon us, although we're not responsible for natural resources, we are responsible for Indigenous affairs and Indigenous land as a federal government. And I think we have a responsibility to the First Nation and Métis, given what has happened, to follow up to be sure that what is said is going to be done is done and that it's satisfactory to them. So I would say that I would like to have this motion put forward and with a date in October. And that, I don't believe we've called them liars in here. The language I think that the chair put forward, inability to provide definitive answers changes it, the tone of it. And again, I'm amenable to other changes to the preamble, but I do believe that it would be respectful of us to move this now that we've heard the testimony and make sure that the First Nation and Métis people who came and spoke to us very passionately realize that we are taking this seriously and that we understand that they do not trust the AER right now in Imperial Oil, and it will take time to rebuild that trust. And so in the interim, we are willing to follow up in October to see what has been done and to play that kind of role. And I think like I said, I think it's completely appropriate to do that. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Mr. McLean, to what I had to say. Mr. McLeod, sorry. Mr. McLean, Mr. McLeod.
Yeah,
Mr. McLeod.
Chairman, I just quickly wanted just to add a little. I want to say it was hard to sit here and listen to people say we're bringing forward a motion in bad faith. We followed all the rules. We certainly followed the committee rules. I was told I couldn't bring the motion forward, so it had to be a regular member. The regular member brought it forward and then left, so it came back to me, but she's back again, so it's kind of back in her lap again. So, I mean, we tried to do our best to follow all the rules, and I think the intent of the study was to try to find out what happened and how it could be fixed. And I tell you, I really feel very content that I was able to sit here and join in, because I heard the president from Imperial Oil and I heard the regulator speak. And as a person that lives downstream from some of the activities that are happening in the south, and everything that flows into the water flows across my doorstep, I probably heard more in those presentations than I heard in all of my life from those people that are that's what they do to make their living. So, but I also heard them say that there's more investigation that needs to be done. They need more answers. They need more tests, more studies. So I think it's, it just made sense to me to be able to have them come back and fill those gaps and provide the information that they've gathered probably over the summer. And I would appreciate if that is something that could happen, because I think we're all on the same page here. It's just maybe we didn't use the proper wording, and if that's the case, then maybe we need to revisit how we worded it. Maybe a little bit too much emotion was put into the drafting, but that wasn't the intent to upset anybody. The intent was to try to get all the information we could so we know what happened and how they're going to prevent it from happening again.
Monsieur Boulres.
Merci, monsieur.
Mr. Bullis, thank you very much, Chair. First, thank you very much for welcoming me to your committee. I'm very happy to fill in for my colleague from Victoria, and she asked me to present an amendment to the motion that is before us today that I distributed to the clerk and that has been given out. It would be an addition to one of the points. It was given out by email. Go ahead. Thank you very much, Chair. So an addition will be made to point A that says, invite the CEO of Imperial Oil, the AER, and we would add the Government of Alberta's Environment Minister and the Government of Canada's Environment Minister for a 2-hour meeting in October 2023, etc. So I will take 2 seconds to justify and explain this amendment that I think is a friendly one, because these companies have responsibilities and government organizations who are in charge of regulation have responsibilities, but we live in a democracy where we also have departmental responsibility, and politicians also have to answer for events that are shocking, like this one, to know what measures were taken and what measures must be taken as well. Because it's too easy just to say, when they're not here, well, legislation doesn't allow for this, the regulations, etc. But at the end of the day, departmental responsibility is provincial and federal. We want to hear from both, because we don't want just a ping-pong game here. We want both to answer committee questions to get to the bottom of things. And we have political responsibility with respect to the actions and measures that were taken and or will have to be. And I think it's a friendly amendment that respects our institutions and the way that we work. And this happens often, that we ask ministers to come to answer questions at committee. And I think it would be quite interesting to have them here with this in mind, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Boulres. Now, we will launch the debate about the proposed amendment of Mr. Boulerice. Who would like to speak about Mr. Boulerice's amendment? Mr. Legge?
Fairly substantial amendment. Can we just pause for a few minutes so we can just have a quick conversation discussing it? Thanks.
Okay. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Duguid?
Opposed.
Mr. Longfield?
Opposed.
Ms. Taylor-Roy? Mr. Weiler?
Opposed.
Mr. McLeod?
Sorry, Mr. Chair,
The NDP amendment.
Mr. Terry, I didn't have my headset on, so I didn't hear the amendment. I apologize.
The amendment is essentially to add to the list of invitees the Minister of Environment from Alberta and the Federal Minister of Environment.
Monsieur Dattel?
Contre.
Against.
I'm opposed.
Mr. Lake? Mr. McLean?
I'm opposed.
Madame Posey?
En faveur.
Pour.
So 9 nays, 2 yeas.
So the amendment is defeated, and we keep going with our previous speakers list. I was at Mr. Couric. Vous êtes là, on n'est pas rendu encore.
We haven't got to yet, Madame Posey, but we're coming.
Thank you, Chair. I believe Mr. Lake has an amendment that would.
Je pense que Monsieur Lake.
A few minor sort of cleaning up amendments too. So I don't know if I should move them all. I think I'll move the main one first. So in the preamble, we would remove the words starting with and following all the way to communities at risk that. So it would read that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee, and then from there, okay, we'd clean up A a little bit. I can come back to minor cleanup, but I will say the words never happens again there don't really make sense in the context of that. And I think we all agree that we don't want to ever see it again. We want them to come to address the issues resulting from the tailings pond leak. So it would end at tailings pond leak. And then B is fine. And then C, the start of C is redundant again. So we don't need the phrase that these meetings take place in October 2023. We determined that in A. So it would just start with that these meetings. And I believe we would prefer that we don't make the decision on televising right now, but we talked to Mr. McLeod. He wants to make sure that they're televised. We understand that, so we're good with that. So that these meetings be televised and that the evidence gathered, that would all stay in. It would start with that these meetings be televised.
Can you read the whole thing?
Sure. Okay. So as amended, it would say that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee, A, invite the CEO of Imperial Oil and the Alberta Energy Regulator for a 2-hour meeting in October 2023 to provide this committee with updates on what steps they took since April 2023 to address the issues resulting from the tailings pond leak. And it would end there. B, as is. And then C, that these meetings be televised and that the evidence gathered during these meetings be taken into consideration during the study of freshwater.
Any debate on this amendment? Madame Posey.
Oui, je vais finir par parler.
Oh, finally I have the floor. First of all, I missed 2 meetings on the topic. I attended the first one with the indigenous communities, and I must say that was the most moving session I ever attended as an MP. And I thank the people who just spoke, because that certainly made me understand the content of the meetings which I had missed. So I agree with Mr. Daines' amendment, but never mind whether the company could send us pages and pages of documents. What we want to know, what measures they actually took since April 2023 when they appeared in front of the committee. These are the important documents for us to receive. And that should be so. I'm in agreement with the Mr. Ain's amendment. Sorry.
And I agree with that.
Mr. Duguid,
Approve.
Mr. Longfield,
In favor.
Ms. Taylor Roy, Mr. Weiler,
In favor.
and Mr. McLeod.
In favor.
Monsieur Dadtel,
En faveur.
Mr. Kirk,
I support.
Mr. Lake, Mr. McLean,
En faveur.
Madame Posé,
Pour.
Monsieur Baudresse,
En faveur.
Donc, excusez, allez-y. Non, c'est unanime.
So we have unanimous consent for adopting the amendment. And let's move on to the motion as amended, Mr. Lake. It's okay.
Emailed out just so that we are
we
operating
can
with
do that,
certainty
yep.
what our path forward is.
Should we
Thank you.
pause until then, or is it ready to go? Pause.
so that we can vote. So would anyone, did everyone receive the motion as amended? Yeah, and could somebody call the vote?
Call the vote. It's unanimous.
Is it unanimous? Okay. So do we need to do a roll?
Chair, just because there's been a few times where we've passed things without having, just give us a few seconds so somebody can talk, or if you wouldn't mind just allowing for a moment to ensure that we're all on the same page in both official languages.
Monsieur le Président, dans la version française, c'est vraiment juste du fin détail de rien du tout. Là. Le point signe, qu'elle soit télévisée. On comprend que ce sont les audiences, mais dans la version anglaise, c'est that these meetings. Donc, on précise dans la version anglaise des audiences, ou enfin des meetings. Et dans le cas ici, on parle qu'elle soit. On comprend que ce sont, mais peut-être juste, tant qu'à être là-dessus, là. C'est ça. Je veux juste la préciser, mais... Je ne ferai pas la grève de la faim.
Could we be more specific?
Pour les corrections...
Regarding changes and small editorial changes and spelling, we do not need a motion to do that. So let me read in English first. And if there are small changes to be brought to the text, we could do it.
082, the committee, A, invite the CEO of Imperial Oil and the Alberta Energy Regulator for a 2-hour meeting in October 2023 to provide this committee with updates on what steps they took since April 2023 to address the issues resulting from the tailings pond. I think it's the tailings pond leak.
Yes.
Yeah. The Curl tailings pond leak. So we're adding Curl, taking the S from ponds to put it on tailings.
And just to be accurate, Mr. Chair, it's seepage and spill, not leak. So there was one spill and there was some seepage was the first indication.
Leak to seepage and spill? Is that it? Yeah, okay. Okay, unanimous consent? Yeah, okay, good. B, that during the meetings, Imperial, capital I, Oil, and the Alberta, we add the Alberta Energy Regulator provide the committee with the documents that support the actions they took. C, that these meetings be televised and that the evidence gathered during these meetings be taken into consideration during the study of freshwater. I don't think freshwater needs a capital F, but Monsieur Deltel, vous sembliez dire qu'il fallait ajouter un mot.
You seem to be saying that one word should be added to...
Donc l'anglais, on est d'accord? Tout le monde est d'accord?
We agreed on the English version. This is unanimously agreed. Let me read the French. So, for the committee to invite the CEO of Imperial Oil Limited and Alberta Energy Regulator for a 2-hour meeting in October 23, in order for them to explain the measures, the update measures that they made since April 2023 in order to solve problems flowing from, was it seepage and leaks, seepage and spill? So it's no longer the leak, it is the spill. L'année dernière, c'était ce qui était employé l'an dernier. Spill is déversement.
Pardon? Sointement. Alors, je viens d'apprendre quelque chose.
Suintement, oui, c'est très joli.
Et déversement. Curl. Il faut ajouter curl. Bon. Et trois, que des bassins de décantation.
Point of order, Mr.
Rappel au règlement.
A hard time following because sometimes the French is on the English channel.
Yes.
The English is on the French channel, and then it reverses back. So I'm
Okay.
Yeah, respectfully, around the table, people are switching from English to French and French to English.
Okay. Est-ce que vous m'entendez maintenant en anglais?
Can you hear me now in English? Somebody speaking without the microphone and cannot be heard, therefore cannot be translated. Now, so let's stick to French with the English translation. Can you hear me in English, Mr. McLeod? All right. I didn't want to switch languages. So, point B, during these meetings, Imperial Oil Limited and Alberta Energy Regulator provide the committee with the documents that support the actions they took. C, point C. And this is where you have a change, Monsieur, that these meetings be televised. I propose the same word, meetings, these meetings be televised, and that the evidence gathered during these meetings be taken into consideration during the study of fresh water without capital F. So we will be sending you a fresh copy in order to be able to agree unanimously and move to something else.
Chair, in light of all of that, I think we've got to the point where we're comfortable with it. It can be distributed, but I'd certainly be comfortable with moving forward.
Alors, c'est adopté à l'unanimité.
So agreed unanimously. Mr. Longfield, I believe you have another motion to table.
Following up on the gracious invitation of a member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake, where she was asking each one of us if we'd like to come up, I'd like to move that the committee book travel to Fort McMurray to witness the environmental damage caused by the Curl Tailings Pond leak. I had circulated this before the meeting, but maybe we can circulate this now, so we do have it in both official languages. That the committee and its analysts can use the evidence gathered on this expedition to be part of the study on freshwater and any future study on tailings ponds leaks. I move that the clerk of the committee be empowered to draft a travel budget and present it to the committee, and that the committee review this travel budget no later than May 15th. And we do have I think a May 1st deadline to get things in front of liaison, so that's why I thought I would get this motion on the
I
floor.
believe we have to get it in front of liaison, logistically speaking, by May 12th. So
Okay.
you would have to modify the date in your motion, I think, that the committee look at it by what, May, I don't know what May 12th is.
Okay, I see.
May 11th? What?
May 12th is a Friday.
11th is our Thursday meeting.
Yeah, so we would look at it on May 11th?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Juste une question, Monsieur le Président. Il y a
I just have one question. Isn't there a deadline? Yes, and it is May 19th. But we have in concrete terms to table our request for the 12th.
Thanks to Mr. Longfield for moving this, and I certainly encourage all Canadians to visit Fort McMurray and Canada's oil sands and some of the incredible landscapes. It's just it'll take your breath away. I can assure you all of that. I would, however, note just this is very specific. And I know in some of our previous discussions related to the upcoming freshwater study, we had specified a few deadlines to get recommended locations that the committee would be able to travel to. I believe, and maybe Chair or Madam Clerk would be able to correct, but I believe that the deadline for those was a few weeks ago, and I know we had submitted that, and we actually had put on that list that Fort McMurray would be a great stop for this. So my question is just in terms of. This is very specific to, but related to the freshwater study. So I'm just wondering, with that upcoming deadline, some of the conversations that we had about proposed committee travel in relation to some of the other locations that may be valuable across the country. I'm just curious as to where that's at. And
yeah. Okay. So as I understand, so we've agreed to go to Fort McMurray. And the same deadline would apply as far as I know. We'd have to get in any other travel recommendations by May 12th. Has anyone submitted anything in writing? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Couric? You've submitted something in writing for travel for the freshwater study?
So yes, we did. I canvassed our members and had.
And you sent something in?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not aware of it. It might have been distributed and I didn't see it.
Sorry, Chair. The conversations were, I believe, and I'd have to go back and look, but the conversations that we had, and I believe it was in camera, so I won't go into details just to protect that, but to that we would have I believe prior to kind of Easter was the expected timelines, and then to submit a list of prospective travel locations. So I'm just concerned about the if we're moving a motion to travel to Fort McMurray. I would suggest that there is more than just the area that's been impacted by this. There's some tremendous. In fact, the mayor of the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo had talked about and had a little bit of time to share how they have developed incredible partnerships with Indigenous communities in clean water. So if we're limiting the travel to just the leak, that's certainly one thing. But I think in terms of the larger travel, we expect. I think certainly the conversations we've had is that this is going to be a big study. The freshwater study, that is, and to ensure that we can get before the deadline some of the suggested locations and to figure out if we're going to hold hearings as well. I know that was an outstanding question that I had, if we would be traveling for committee members to view locations, or if we would ensure that we could hear from whether it's Indigenous communities or other affected areas. So my comment and I think larger question is, I would prefer, instead of adopting one motion, and I haven't had a chance to speak with my colleagues, but certainly my personal preference would be for us to look at the larger committee travel proposal, include Fort McMurray and the Kearl site. I think that's entirely reasonable, and the tailings pond that as well is very, very reasonable. But just to have that larger committee proposal, which we would have to have in before the May 19th deadline in order to get it to liaison, so that we can go through the process of which the study will start in the fall. So I just encourage the committee, maybe instead of. Maybe a motion is the right way, but just to have some of these conversations, I think, would be valuable.
Yeah, okay. So before I go to Madame Posey, Mr. Deltel, and Mr. Duguid, I mean,
I'm in line here too, Mr. Chair.
oh, so you're in line. Yeah, okay. Sorry, Mr. McLean. Why don't, I mean, here's an idea. Like, you say you've already submitted something. Why don't we just, and we have called for submissions. By what date did we say? We didn't put a date. So why don't we say, everybody submit your ideas for travel, for the freshwater study, by say maybe Wednesday of next week, and then I can sit down with the analysts and we can work up a proposal and then come back to you whatever the next meeting is, the 11th, I think, and no, even before, even maybe before the, anyway, we'll work on that, and then we'll see what we can put together. In the meantime, we could still adopt the motion saying, at a minimum, we go to Fort McMurray. You know, and as I say, we'll have everyone submit their travel proposals by next Wednesday, and then I'll work with the analysts and the clerk, and we'll try and drum up some kind of plan, and we'll discuss it with the steering committee essentially, and then come back to the committee with a final proposal. Does that work? So we've adopted unanimously the motion, the idea that we're going to go to Fort McMurray, visit the Curl site at a minimum.
But at this point, I don't want to just adopt this motion. It was just this first time we've seen it, and there might be a few changes I want to make to the motion. The spirit of going to Fort McMurray, absolutely. But the motion as written, I have some thoughts.
Okay, well, the motion's been tabled.
Right.
So we have to debate it.
So can we take another couple of minutes because we just saw it?
But in between, I just wanted to propose to everyone, send in your travel proposals by Wednesday, and we'll start working on something. But we'll go back to the motion, and you need a minute? Yeah? Okay. It looks like there have been discussions among the parties. It looks like there have been discussions among the parties. Mr. Longfield?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to first say it sounds like everybody wants to go to Fort McMurray, but it's also part of submissions that we're going through the governance on to see where we want to go as a committee. So I'll withdraw my motion so that we could then have some committee business to discuss the 3 locations Madame Posey has and the several that the rest of us have. And I think the intention is to get to Fort McMurray, and let's just find out how we can do that with
Apparently, the Conservatives have sent something in, travel proposals. Madame Posey has sent in travel proposals. Monsieur Boulris, you can send in travel proposals, and the Liberals too. And we're going to crunch those and see what comes out of it. So, somebody had their hand up, Madame Posey.
Oui, alors, oui, il y a plusieurs semaines, je dirais que M. Lompré nous avait demandé d'envoyer. Alors, moi, mon devoir, il était fait. J'avais Fort McMurray, effectivement, dans la ligne.
I don't know if it's me. I'm not hearing any translation.
I had Fort McMurray on my list. I start over. So several weeks ago, we were supposed to send to Mr. Lompré our ideas for travel, and we had done it. And we did have Fort McMurray. The only thing that we don't know is how many days we can be away. What's allowed? Are there rules? I don't know what the rules are about that. It is whatever the liaison committee will accept. Okay, I'm on that committee, so that's very good.
No, ça prend l'unanimité.
We need unanimity. Mr. Longfield wants to withdraw his motion. And for that, we need the unanimous approval of the committee. I believe that we have a consensus and a unanimity, so it is withdrawn. And we'll come back on this later. Anything else? We have about 40 minutes left. We could go in camera to discuss our report on subsidies for fossil fuel. Just one thing. We voted on Mr. Lake's amendment. Have we voted for the proposal as amended? I think so, yes. We didn't vote because it was unanimous. It was passed unanimously. So we'll have another pause in order to go in camera now.
Thank you. Thank you.